Welcome to Wales Tech Week 2021. Thank you to our partners. Enjoy the session.
So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session. How are we using tech to drive food sustainability? So, in this session, we have two exciting talks on some of the latest research and innovations driving food sustainability. And I guess throughout history, technology has revolutionized agriculture, from the invention of the plough to tractors, and now in the digital age, technologies such as robotics and sensors, mobile applications, to mention a few, are all being used to help us to increase efficiency and, importantly, both the economic and environmental sustainability of food production. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Gwynn from AberInnovation University and Luke Tyler from Tyfu, who are speakers in this session, who will highlight and tell us about their experience of cutting-edge research, tech research and innovations currently driving food sustainability. So many thanks to you both for joining us, and we look forward to hearing your talks and following up with some interesting questions and discussions from the audience at the end of this session. So if any of you have any questions for our speakers, please do add them to the chat section for this session or comment section, and we will take a look at these at the end of the two presentations. So our first speaker is Dr. Gwynn Jones, who is a reader in the Institute of Biological, Environmental and Rural Sciences at AberInnovation University. And some of Dylan's research interests are around elevated carbon dioxide and plant stressors, including in agriculture and horticultural crops. And some of this focuses on stress tools and using stressor exposure to manipulate plant chemistry and crop quality. So today, Dylan will be giving a talk to us about developing indoor crop systems. So if you could share the screen now, then we'll start off with Dylan. Thank you, Dylan.
Okay, Prynhawn da, good afternoon, everybody. So today I'm going to talk about indoor crop systems. It's going to be quite a broad presentation. I'll talk about both indoor glass houses, LED systems, but also it's applicable also to polytunnel systems. Next slide, please. Oh, okay, so these are some of the questions or challenges that I thought I'd cover. Well, firstly, why go indoors when we've got we have soil, we have precipitation and rainfall, we also have ample sunlight and so on. So these are some of the questions. Also, I'm going to discuss energy and systems, the importance of systems, the quality nutrition in terms of crops. These are things that we aspire towards. The product, yield, also profitability, but also public perception. And finally, of course, who's going to actually deliver this? Next slide, please. Okay, so the first question is why? Well, there are many reasons. These are two photographs. Obviously, they're familiar to us in these days where we're experiencing the impacts of climatic change. And of course, we have droughts, we have high rainfall episodes and so on. And the issue is, of course, about the whole reliability of crop production outdoors. And of course, although we are successful with crop production, the issue is that we have to mitigate, and we have to find ways of supplementing. Obviously, we're in a situation in terms of the UK where we import crops, but also we're in a situation whereby we have a growing human population. So we have to respond to many of these challenges. But of course, the key is to do so in a sustainable way. There's no point growing crops indoors in energy inefficient or unsustainable ways. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd go to the extreme in relation. This is actually a photograph from the Arctic, which you probably would never expect to see. This is an interesting ecosystem. This is in Svalbard. This is at 78 degrees north. I've done a lot of work in kind of polar regions. And what's interesting about this system is, of course, there are inputs and there are outputs. And here we've got a plant. You can see a little bit of green, Dryas octopetala. This is an interesting plant. It photosynthesizes at 6 degrees Celsius, most effectively at 6 degrees Celsius. But of course, as an ecosystem, what we see is the biological components interact with the physical components. And of course, in terms of field season, in the Arctic, we see very long days during the summer period, quite cool weather, and so on. But the reality is we still see plants kind of flourish, and also we see animals have the capacity, obviously, to kind of extract and to forage these particular systems. So even the most extreme places on Earth, we see adaptations. And this is, of course, key in terms of growing plants, either kind of in the field, in glass houses, or indoors, is to know about the kind of the plant nation, to understand the environmental conditions required for a plant. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of interest in ecosystems, one of the things that we've been looking at is actually, can we actually apply ecosystem principles to kind of agriculture or production systems? This is a collaboration with kind of Tata Steel. And in this case, we had an industrial byproducts. We had a waste material called filter cake, which was high in zinc. And we also had another waste material, which is CO2. And so what we tried to do was to actually find ways of harvesting the zinc within this system, but also potentially sequestering the CO2. And in this case, we used a plant, which is a fast-growing aquatic plant, which is called Lemna minor. And as you can see from the setup, you can see metal precipitating on the surface. And if we go to the next slide, I can just give you an overview of this kind of system. So when we talk about ecosystems, we talk about the biological components interacting with the physical components. On the right-hand side, what we see are the physical components. We've got the kind of raw materials, we've got manufacture, we've got waste material, we've got the gas CO2, and we've also got filter cake. So what we've done here is essentially use the CO2 to actually acidify the water. What acidification does is essentially makes the zinc available from the filter cake. We then can grow Lemna minor in this aquatic system and create biomass that is then high in zinc, that can then be kind of processed and extracted. And in many ways, when we talk about the kind of the circular economic approach, again, we can look at the foundations of this thinking. It's based on kind of ecosystems. So we apply kind of ecosystem principles to industrial systems. Next slide, please. This is another project, Brainwaves. This is on agri-prospecting. This is looking at waste streams in agricultural systems. Again, we're using Lemna minor, and what we're doing is actually processing slurry and also digestate using essentially this kind of aquatic plant. And of course, what's very interesting about Lemna minor is that it's extremely high in protein, up to kind of 30 to 40% protein. So as a resource, what we've got is biomass that's also high in protein. And so this project again goes down the kind of principles of the kind of circular economy. And in many ways, this is the only way we can make systems sustainable, by thinking in a joined up way and looking at the various components and opportunities, particularly in terms of waste. Next slide, please. We also have, we're also grateful to kind of Sir Cymru for funding to look at advanced indoor crop production systems. This is a project that essentially looks at the interface between the research that we do, but also embedding that into kind of industrial systems and realizing kind of that research. And the aim, of course, here, it's if you develop a technology, it may work in a glass house, in a laboratory, and so on, but it has to actually be embedded in the right kind of situation. And what this project aims to do is to actually to actually do that, to actually introduce it to industry. Next slide, please. We've also been working with the interest in particular on indoor systems, hydroponic systems. We've also been working on pop-up systems. And this is, oddly enough, a collaboration from the past, really, in terms of my collaborators at British Antarctic Survey. And the background behind this is, of course, that there's interest, obviously, in remote areas in local food production that's highly efficient. So what we've been looking at are potential pop-up systems that can be used to actually very efficiently produce food. And of course, this can be applied even further if we can make these systems super efficient. Next slide, please. And of course, one of the key aims is to actually produce something of value. It's about quality and often nutrition. And it's about selecting the appropriate species. As you can see on the right there, we've got lettuce under LED. And then we've got some microgreens on the left-hand side. And interestingly, if you look at some of the nutrients within the microgreens, there's significantly more in a very small amount of microgreens than huge areas of lettuce. And the key here, of course, is to actually introduce nutrition to the population in the right way. We use also stress tools, so we stress plants. So in indoor environments, of course, they wouldn't experience natural stressors. In the outdoor environment, they of course would. And what this does to the plant is it will stimulate the chemistry, in particular, for example, antioxidants and elements that might be important in terms of nutrition. So what we've been doing is developing controlled stress in a way whereby we control and optimize nutrition. And finally, on quality and nutrition is the actual breeding. The issue with breeding is that most crops have been bred for the outdoor environment. And so there's significant interest here in Aberystwyth and, of course, globally in trying to actually breed for the indoor environment and actually trying to optimize the actual the species, the plants, the genotypes and so on for the indoor environment. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've given you an overview of some of the work that we do. Of course, it's far more diverse. There's more work that we conduct in this area. We work, obviously, with computer science. Also, we work with psychologists. But these are just some of the products. So on left-hand side, we produce tech in order to optimize growth, stress tools and so on. We then have got the product, which is the crop itself, right there in the middle. And of course, another product is, of course, introducing young people and training people and introducing them and introducing new skills and diverse skills that will be important for this industry. On the top right-hand side, we see a colleague of mine, Manfred. He's working on biomarkers. And of course, there's great analytical opportunities here in terms of moving forward, of course, in terms of trying to identify the various chemicals, to characterize them, and so on. And finally, we've got a photograph. Essentially, in terms of society, we need to actually look very carefully at nutrition. Can we produce foods that are nutritionally beneficial for health in terms of mitigating illnesses, but also in terms of optimizing human health? Next slide, please. Of course, when we move indoors, there may be an issue in relation to public perception. I put the word Frankenstein food there, but the reality is today, and we must move forward, and we must actually essentially build on what we're good at here in Wales. And of course, we've got the opportunity to use this to create a platform to educate at all levels. This area also allows us to consider zero carbon, or to aspire towards zero carbon agriculture. We can also create reliable and sustainable supply chains. And interestingly as well, we can also enrich our food culture by looking at a more diverse range of crops. Also, I think very importantly is that we should be using our farming expertise. We should be working with farmers. There are 17,000 farms in Wales, so 17,000 businesses are out there that can actually kind of work with us and move this area forward. I talked obviously about optimizing human health and nutrition. Also, there's the opportunity of community projects and community involvement. Also, locally produced food, very importantly economically, is the potential to create jobs and also to kind of export products. Next slide, please. Okay, so who will deliver? Well, these are just some of the kind of groups involved. Obviously, I put the farmers and growers, and I kind of have aptly put a Swiss Army knife there because the farmers in Wales are multi-skilled and multi-tooled, and they have the capacity to actually adapt and to embrace new technologies and the opportunity now to diversify. Very importantly, of course, is the role of higher education and further education, because we need individuals trained at all levels. Recently, the Wales Horticulture Alliance was formed, and I know Luke is involved with that as well. That is a group that brings various stakeholders, including growers, but a wide range of people from across Wales to actually move this vision forward. And that is driven by Tyfu Cymru. Of course, on the right-hand side, of course, we've got also facilitators, which is the kind of innovation campus, the AberInnovation, and of course, our collaborators, BIC Innovation. And of course, let's not forget the opportunity for many companies to kind of become involved and to realize this area and to take this vision forward. Next slide. Okay, so I'd like to thank you all for listening, and I'll be grateful for any questions at the end. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr.
And dare I say, your talk has given us much food for thought there. I know the audience will have some interesting questions for Dylan. What we'll do now is go on to the second presentation and follow up then with questions for both Dylan and Luke afterwards. So may I introduce our second speaker, Luke Tyler, who is Agritech Manager at Tyfu. So many thanks for joining us. And Luke leads Tyfu, which is a vertical farming pilot project in Gwynn and Ynys Môn, delivered by Mentor Môn, and Tyfu is exploring the potential for controlled environment agriculture in the fresh food supply chain across North Wales. So Luke will be giving us a talk today about Tyfu and vertical farming. So over to you, Luke. Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much indeed, Rebecca, and really enjoyed hearing Dylan's presentation just then. I'm very much privileged to be part of this session today. Can everyone see my screen? If that's, I've just started sharing. Okay, Tyfu is our vertical farming pilot project, and it is essentially looking at the supply chain, or the possibilities of a supply chain for vertical farm produce in North Wales. We've essentially began in 2020 with providing fully funded systems, vertical farming systems to local growers. And we've been running an ongoing program of training and support for people participating in our project, and a series of webinars that have been trying to attract a more public audience as well. We found that there are quite a lot of farmers and people in the region who see vertical farming as a rural diversification means, and that in order to adapt income streams to the changing economies, vertical farming is one really significant possibility. We've developed the project in a number of ways. We've still retained very close work with our growers group. I'll talk about in a moment. And we've also started branching out into education, vertical farming as an educational resource, and we've been building our own commercial scale vertical farm at Menai Science Park for the purposes of demonstrating the value of the technology and partnering with various tech partners and promoting the facility as an opportunity for innovation and research. So to start off with, Dylan's already covered a lot of the benefits and the interest that we've had in vertical farming as a means of improving sustainability. Just to sort of run over them a little bit from our supply chain perspective, by the sort of, as Dylan referred to them as pop-up or pop-up agriculture, we sort of look at this as being short supply chains, growing food close to the point of use, and in so doing reducing transport costs, food miles, and therefore packaging, refrigeration costs as well. Vertical farming uses considerably less water than growing the same crops in field environments or using hydroponics. This is because the nutrient use efficiency is also improved as well. And so there's also a lack of pesticides being used in vertical farming. This is, again, because of the controlled environment. And in so doing, we're able to improve the sustainability of sort of water use management on a larger scale. So there are lots of different benefits that we're looking to promote. And these all come into the picture in sort of larger strategic fit for these projects. What we started off doing was we purchased a number of systems at the very beginning of the project. We had some nutrient film technique systems and some flood and drain systems that people were that would grow microgreens, specialty leaves, these produce that is nutritionally dense, higher value crops. And these were fully funded and offered for a year's use to our project participants as an opportunity for them to gain skills in the vertical farming sector. And in so doing, we were trying to help people bypass these initial startup costs of an expensive piece of equipment that requires a very different skill set and removing barriers to entering this market. Our primary goal was to develop the supply chains for people venturing into this sector. And do so in a collaborative means. Specifically, we were looking at how the market could work, growing the high-value crops close to the point of use, and working particularly with the hospitality sector. In North Wales, we're blessed with a number of high-end restaurants that are very much linked to the tourism sector. And although with COVID, we've had some serious challenges, things are beginning to open up again, and this market is becoming more attractive. All of the crops I'm about to talk about are experiencing increased demand, and by growing them locally, we're able to offer an added value by growing them to spec and growing them to a higher level of freshness than they would otherwise be if imported. The short lifespans of these crops that Dylan touched on, and I'll go into in a moment, offer an advantage or USP if you grow them close to the point of use locally, add the brand of it being a local product, and telling a story with the food that we grow in the region. Again, the reduced packaging and food miles and associated costs are also part of the brand that we're trying to emphasise. And a big finding we've had is that we were initially a little bit, there was some trepidation over what could be seen as an urban farming technique, or vertical farming, reduced space. Why are we doing this in the rural sector? And what we found was that really it's the value of our relationships that we make with the people who are on the supply chain, with the hospitality sector, with restaurants, with distributors. It's the value of these relationships that's much more important than how many people live in the area. And because our growers have been able to build these relationships so successfully, this has proven to be more valuable than whether or not we are operating in a rural or an urban economy. As it happens, in the rural sector, we have a lot of agricultural buildings that can be retrofitted, as I'll talk about in a moment. And we also have the markets, and we have, as Dylan said, farmers that have got an understanding of supply chains, growing crops, and food markets. And all of this can be brought together to make a success of this rural diversification technique. So the first crop we've been looking at quite a bit has been pea shoots. This has seen increased demand quite a lot regionally, and we've been growing them quite successfully on a number of different substrates, and you can get between 3 and 5 crops out of a single pea. And you can get many kilos of produce from a single metre by 1.5 metre tray. So it's been a tried and tested means of generating income, and we've been encouraging all our growers to sort of start off with this. We've been looking at microgreens. Again, these are very nutritionally dense, and I'll run over some of them just now. Sprouted radish has been an intensely enjoyable taste, as well as being very nutritionally dense, but also adds a lot of colour. So they've been a valued component of food bags and boxes. Sprouted broccoli, very high in protein. Again, it's been used as a crop for producing plant protein, and also with these antioxidants that are proven to be quite popular in terms of selling the health element of the brand. Microleeks is another crop we've been pioneering, and again, this is sort of the local element of the crop, being a national plant of Wales, grown on a micro scale. Immensely tasty, very sweet, a little bit like a spring onion. Between a spring onion and a leek, but a little sweeter perhaps. Really popular, particularly with the schools, and we're going to be continuing to grow this at larger scales. Let's talk about some of our growers. We've had some real success stories. I'll start off with a grower based in Harlech, Bailey's and Partners, who've created their own brand. They've got biodegradable, compostable packaging, and they've been doing veg boxes, salad boxes, and they've been selling them at local markets, to local restaurants. And this has all been in the last, since the beginning of 2021. They've already got an established supply chain and are in the process of putting together a business plan to upscale their business to a larger commercial scale. And it all started with just one, with the growers workshops we've been running, and the initial loan of the equipment. They've developed their brand. They're very good social media strategy, posting very regularly, and being very engaging, reaching out to lots of different partners. One of their staff did the AberInnovation bioinnovation Wales course, and was very pleased to learn things from that. And they went through the environmental health procedure. We've had quite a lot of emphasis on environmental health and food hygiene as part of the courses we've been doing. So real success story in the making. It's been a very promising start for them. Last year, we did a lot of work with Hootons on Anglesey. So Hootons looked at a number of different crops: spinach, coriander, fixing eventually on watercress as produce to be that had very good continuity. It sprouted straight up again. Could be grown easily in clay balls, which didn't involve having to change over matting substrate. And it became a really good crop. It was sold as fast as it could be produced, and retailed at quite a good sort of return. It was surprisingly tasty as well for hydroponically grown watercress. It was really, it ended up being really a very popular crop, and we're looking at ways of continuing and scaling up this particular crop. Clay balls are really good growing substrates. We've been looking quite a lot into growing substrates. They've been able to absorb the light quite nicely from the LEDs and keep the plants well insulated. Very good sort of buffering capacity, ion exchange, root aggregation is quite helpful. We've been looking at with Colleague in Cleavon, one of the Agricultural College South Carnarvon, who is a project partner. We've been looking at using wool as a substrate for growing various crops, lettuce, strawberries. This is a strawberry grown in a wool plug from the Glenlevon sheep, with some biostimulant, or in the form of arbuscum mycorrhiza fungi, which seems to have been quite helpful in promoting increased root proliferation. Really interesting stuff there, and we're hoping to make this an entirely separate project, an area for research, based on the properties of wool being antimicrobial. It's compostable. It's sourced locally. Some really interesting possibilities there, and for hydroponics that we think can be touched upon. We've been working with schools as well locally. This has been an offshoot of our initial project. We've been putting vertical farms in local schools, starting off with a school, Cardigaby, Holyhead. In the space of 3 weeks, the students were given a sort of a coursework project to use a vertical farm to grow different crops. They learned we did sessions with them, taught students the processes behind operating vertical farms, and they ended up producing a product in the space of under a month, which was a veg bag, which was microgreens, pea shoots, and various other crops. And these were given to local restaurants and parents and teachers. It proved very popular, and we've been We've been trying to upscale this project. There's more funding applications underway. We want to make this an actual part of the curriculum in the island schools, and ideally in the region as well. And we're looking at ways of bringing together different disciplines after this Donaldson report, which has been promoting multidisciplinary learning as part of the education, or the revised education approach in Wales. Vertical farming is really good for this. It allows looking at all sorts of things, from the science, the food tech, to the marketing, economics. It allows lots of different learning outcomes to be achieved in a very experiential way and a very memorable way, which these students found very engaging. So great stuff there, and really excited to be carrying that on. The last thing we're doing, or at the moment, is we're building a commercial scale vertical farm at Menai Science Park. This will be a commercial scale facility. We're looking to demonstrate the value of this technology on a larger scale. We want to provide a facility for research. We want to collaborate with local businesses who want to grow produce to spec. We want to look at the possibilities of growing crops with maybe reduced salt content for local hospitals, various filling specific niches that vertical farming alone can offer by the additional control that you're able to have on the environment. So we're working with tech partners, Axio, who spoke earlier today, V-Farm, Hydrogarden, and Dewin Tech as well, or Lafan Consulting, are all going to be are all partners on this this venture, and we will be offering people a chance to see a very different, a completely new design for vertical farming. We'll be featuring auto dosing and a combined NFT flood and drain system where plants have different lighting intensities and can move through the system. So there'll be much more on this later in the year, and I'm very pleased to be seeing the projects develop. So thank you very much indeed. It's been an enormous pleasure to participate in this, and thank you to AberInnovation for organising this.
Thank you, Luke. Lots of really interesting information there, and great to hear about these developments as well. And I can't help thinking through these talks that I can see there's lots of opportunities for industry and academia collaborations across Wales, and Wales really lending itself to being a test bed for the progression of tech in agriculture. It's also worth me highlighting at this stage that in terms of activity here at our AberInnovation facilities on the Aberystwyth University site, if you're a company working in these sectors, we'd love for you to get in touch with a view to connecting you up with the likes of Dylan and his colleagues, and facilitating further R&D through AberInnovation and university facilities. And on the company side and program side, Tyfu is a fine example of who we would be keen to support. Most welcome to come visit our facilities and use them for further collaborative R&D as well. So I'm sure you all have questions that you're keen to ask. If you'd like to raise these through the comments section on this stage, I'll field these, and Dylan and Luke will be able to answer your questions. So just to kick this off, I'd like to ask a question to both Dylan and Luke. What do you see as the biggest opportunities in this field right now? And this is for both of you. Luke, would you like to go first on this?
What are the biggest opportunities, do you think?
Yeah, what do you see as the biggest opportunities in this field right now?
So there's following the lines we're looking at. I'm really keen on trying to push the education element a bit. I think there's a great deal of sort of potential to use vertical farming in schools. I think for the amount that you invest, the return is very high. I think it creates a very memorable experience. It's got a lot of teaching potential, and I think it's something that isn't really being done in the UK. There's a little bit in Ireland, but the UK isn't really seeing much of it, and certainly not in the public education. And I think it's very much something that we can start looking into doing. And I know Welsh Government is very keen to push this. I think there's also a lot of potential to grow produce more to spec. When we were talking about these microgreens and higher value, higher nutrition crops, these are crops that have got more. It's more efficient to obtain nutrition from these than eating lots of lettuce or something equivalent. We don't really perceive ourselves as being maybe nutritionally deficient, but in actual fact, a lot of our diets are. And I think promoting produce in everyday diets that are locally grown, that have got a brand that people like, that have more nutrition, is a really good use of the technology, and something we really need to be pushing, I think.
Great, thanks, Luke. Dylan, any comments on?
I would agree with Luke. I think the educational side is very important. I highlighted the role of farmers, and that's one thing that we've actually introduced controlled environment agriculture into our agriculture degree, which means that we've got young farmers actually going through the system and learning and getting quite inspired about it in terms of what they can do at home. I think that that's a very important element, and I would agree in terms of schools. I think it's an important component. Very interestingly as well, there's not just the kind of the biological side. There's also the technical side, the sensors, the computer science. There's also the whole kind of psychological side, and Luke talked about nutrition, is that actually convincing people to actually engage with the right nutrition is very important. And that's something, we've been working with the psychology department here a lot on, into trying to find ways of convincing people or getting people to ask questions about nutrition. And that relates to kind of one of the questions that is kind of in the comment box in terms of kind of, can you explain a little more about controlled environment in terms of health outcomes? And I think that's one of the key elements, and schools is key in terms of pushing that educational side, but also the wider community in terms of appreciating. And what's nice about a lot of the crops is, Luke showed some fantastic photographs of some really attractive kind of microgreens. And the reality is, when you go to a supermarket, it's very interesting. The first thing that you see is your fruit and veg, and it's multicolored and beautiful, and it's actually there to actually get you to start collecting, to start buying things. But the reality, it's the same principle with microgreens. There's such a kind of diversity of color and beauty in some of these crops. They actually look attractive to eat, which is also another element in terms of actually convincing people that actually that's probably going to be good for me, particularly if something, for example, is red. It's likely to be, it's going to be high in antioxidants, anthocyanin, and so on. And therefore, I think it is about kind of the whole. So in terms of health, there's that element, but also what Luke said, it's actually being able to make custom kind of crops to respond to kind of health issues. There's a potential to actually make mixes, but also to actually develop crops, to actually breed crops even, that can actually produce minerals, vitamins, and so on to certain levels that can be beneficial for human health.
Thank you, Dylan. We have another question that's popped up in the comments box. Due to the startup costs and energy consumption costs of vertical farms, are we ever likely to see anything other than high value or niche products grown at relatively small scales? Dylan, do you want to go first?
Okay. So I will agree that when you set up a vertical farm, it can cost millions of pounds. My personal vision is not, and I'm sure Luke is the same, it's not. I don't see that as the vision for Wales. We've got the high tech, we've got the low tech. And I think, really, I mean, if you look at some of these vertical farms, they are so kind of advanced, but reality is they don't employ people. And that is a kind of an issue, in my opinion. So you replace, it's good to have technology, but technology in the right place. You've got to create employment. And I think in terms of Wales, the vision should be actually looking at sensor systems. And it's interesting, I mean, you look at developing countries and their role in hydroponics. One of the things they've been looking at is using kind of mobile phones. They actually use mobile phones to control systems. And the reality is, the way that technology is going is that it doesn't necessarily have to be super expensive. The issue of energy, I would say, I mean, Luke said that the systems that they use are kind of low in water consumption, but also in terms of energy, our whole kind of ethos, particularly here, is looking at circular systems, whereby we can actually produce systems that are really efficient. That is a goal that we have here in terms of efficient systems. If they're efficient, that means they're cost effective.
Thank you, Dylan. And Luke, I'm sure you have lots of expertise in this area as well that you can make some comments on.
So the first thing to say is that there is a very good return to be made if you can develop a good supply chain from vertical farming on a small scale, on a medium scale, and on a large scale. So one of the things we've been trying to do is to build business models or business plans, cases for business investment with our growers. And we're in the process of trying to get business support, pitching business ideas to investors based on the back of this modelling. And we found that the modelling can be very robust if you can demonstrate the proof of concept, which I think has been done and is being done all over the place now. The modelling that we've been doing and our partners have been doing has showed that a return can be made quite rapidly. And I think having this a business case before you allows you to attract investment, and this is the same for farming. It's the same for any kind of food production. That there needs to be it needs to be done somehow, and I think investors need to be shown that it works and that there can be a return made, and it isn't just a gimmick. It isn't just flashy. It's not just a fad. So with vertical farming now, it's projected to reach sort of a global industry of something like 10 billion in the next few years. It's not a small niche piece of kit, technology that's being used only by people in a very small sector of society. It is being treated as a very serious means of producing foods to deal with the problems that the environment, the climate chaos, and so forth is causing. It's a serious solution, and I think that there's evidence now to say that it can be something that can be done with investor support. It can also be done affordably. So one of the things we wanted to do with our project is challenge this perception that it is really expensive and impossible. And we had a year ago we ran a sort of a hackathon style event called the Tech2V Challenge, whereby we invited people to pitch their ideas for a small scale vertical farm design, and we would fund them starting at £300. And for that amount, we had quite a few workable prototypes that people had built for quite small amounts of money. Some of these were automated. Some of these had inbuilt power monitors, working out that for a domestic scale vertical farm, it could be powered for about £70 of electricity a year, which isn't too bad. We had some homemade crack key systems. We had somebody produce their own sort of microgreen growing equipment with LED arrays. It was a really good response. If anybody's interested in that, and on the tech2v.com website, we have a showcase of some of these results, whereby it isn't necessarily impossible to build on a budget without large scale amounts of involvement. It's essentially, if you want to do it, it can be done. And it's all about the skills and the supply chain and making the case that it can be financially viable that is the key to it. Just very quickly, I'm also going to mention co-location. It makes a lot of business sense to use resources that are already available in the form of waste. So a big thing that we're doing or a big part of what we're wanting to do at MSpark is use energy from waste or waste heat from thermal hydraulics as a means of keeping our produce warm and keeping the facility warm and heating it. And there's quite a bit of work now looking at how do we dispose of waste heat from the energy sector. There's often quite a lot of waste heat, but it's not particularly hot. It's in the region of 40 degrees or something, and it can't be shipped very far. So really, it needs to be used nearby. So it's a smart solution here, using produce or using resources that are available as a means of generating something else. With carbon, if you enrich controlled environment agriculture with carbon, you can increase the growth rate 20, 30%. And it's the same way you sequester carbon, as Dylan was talking about earlier. There's quite a lot of interest in this now. It's a smart solution that can fill a number of different gaps. And in so doing, I think it makes it attractive to investors, attractive to the public sector, and it makes financial sense if done correctly.
Brilliant, thank you, Luke. I have another question here. Can the speakers give us their thoughts on the potential of controlled environment agriculture for nutraceuticals and pharmaceuticals? Luke, do you want to go first?
Okay, well, very briefly, I think it's got enormous potential because you can grow crop produce more to spec. So because you have greater control over the growing environment, you're able to ensure that the produce has the necessary requirements for pharmaceuticals or nutraceuticals. So for a start, hygiene is a big one. If we grow produce hygienically in a controlled environment, no pesticide contamination, no external influence, there's immediately an advantage. It's also you're able to precisely modulate the nutritional inputs in terms of the water, dissolved nutrition content in the water. Having that level of control is really valuable. You can also control the lights. So some research that I believe Aber was doing a while back was looking at the wavelength of LEDs or artificial lighting to specifically influence the photosynthetic activity of the crops. And having that level of control over what you're doing makes CEA the ideal environment to grow niche produce for pharmaceuticals. Again, there's also the fact that such crops can often be incredibly valuable, and if you're growing it in a CEA environment, it reduces risk of it being lost to environmental stresses. It also reduces the risk of it being stolen if it's in a CEA context. So it makes a lot of sense. You have the control and you have the safety of it being in CEA. I don't actually have any experience of growing pharmaceutical plants in our project. I'm sure that at Aber there'll be something of that kind going on. So I'll hand over to Dylan for the second. So.
I guess the issue is that, and Luke's right in terms of being able to optimize conditions. And often horticulturally, this is what we do. We try to optimize growth of a plant. And so what you get is a nice, green, healthy plant. But the issue of stress is very interesting because by using stressors, we can actually manipulate chemistry in certain ways. So we can, if you use control stress. The other element that's also very important is that you can breed. So you can actually breed plants for their chemistry. But the key, of course, is that what you don't want is to compromise growth for chemistry. And so we've been looking at something called U stress or EU stress, whereby we introduce stress to a certain level to kind of optimize chemistry. I think there's another element to this as well, and it's Luke kind of very wisely used the word co-location. In terms of co-location, it's very important to actually have also the kind of biorefining and the analytical capacity. And that's something that obviously we're quite lucky here in Aber that we've got great kind of potential in terms of looking at biorefining, but also fantastic analytical kind of capacity in being able to look at chemistry. And it's not just one compound. It's a kind of multitude of compounds and materials that you can get from plant biomass. And so as a consequence, again, this is this kind of joined up kind of vision in terms and so in terms of co-location, I think that's very important. So I would kind of agree with Luke. I think there's huge potential in terms of this particular field.
Brilliant, thank you. And one last question, as I think time's coming up to the end. How can Wales move forward to develop indoor agriculture? Dylan.
I think it's extremely encouraging that we've got kind of the alliance that's been put forward. Obviously, I saw Luke at the meeting, and we hadn't met previously. That essentially the Welsh Government is very serious about moving this forward. And it's not just about a certain small group of people. This is inclusive. It's bringing all the stakeholders together, working together. I think the role of farmers is key. These are kind of businesses that exist. They know the supply chain, as Luke highlighted. And so I think in terms of Wales, I think our vision should actually be reliant, or we should be working with them. These kind of huge kind of vertical farms, I'm not sure about in terms of kind of these in cities and so on. But I think in terms of moving forward, I think it's very exciting. And I think Wales is quite serious about this. Welsh Government's serious about it. And I think it's very exciting times.
Luke, would you like to make a comment?
Yeah, so in terms of rural diversification, we have 17,000 or so farms in Wales, 17,000 businesses, and of these, a lot of them are very, very progressive-minded, looking actively for means of diversifying, and CEA is one means which has come very much to the fore. There's great potential to retrofit agricultural buildings and use existing markets and existing expertise and experience of farmers in the Welsh sector to capitalise on their brand. With Welsh farmers and supply chain players are very good at selling produce, they're very good at branding. I think it's one of these situations where very little. It's a question of a solution that exists to fill a void that is clamouring for it. I think there's an enormous amount of potential. There's a document that will be released shortly, which is called the Wales CEA Prospectus. And AberInnovation have been doing the legwork on producing this, and it sets out a very rational and progressive roadmap for CEA adoption in Wales. And I hope this can be circulated as widely as possible when it is finally released and for wider audience. And I would recommend everybody watching this to have a read when it is produced. And it shows the roadmap and just how much is possible. Co-location with renewable energy sources here on the island. On Anglesey, we've got marine energy in the form of mortal ice, the tidal energy coming along. With huge generating potential, clean energy. We have possibilities with hydro in the valleys, Mid Wales, North Wales. One of our growers is actually fully hydro powered and is producing CEA using hydroelectricity. Where I live, Snowdonia is a net exporter of renewable energy. It's a really good resource that can answer this sort of challenge to vertical farming, that it's too energy intensive. We have clean energy and means of generating it here. And it's the ideal place to be doing the technology. It's got all of the natural environment. It's got the expertise in terms of the demographic. So I think there are big things in store.
Exciting to watch then. Sorry, Dylan.
Can I just add something? Is that in terms of the Welsh economy, one of the most successful sectors by a mile has actually been the food and drink sector. And actually, I think we've got to work, and it's been about branding, exactly what Luke said. I think we've got to build on what we've got and supply chains and so on, and actually move this area forward. So I just thought I'd add that because I think it has been a success story, and we should be proud of it.
Great. Well, thank you very much. As we bring this session to a close, I'd just like to say thank you ever so much to our speakers. Really interesting talks and discussions afterwards. And many thanks to our audience as well for listening and joining us in the session. So thank you ever so much. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching. Rewatch all of our sessions online. Thank you to our partners.